there are a variety of things that liberals in America are failing on when it comes to countering fascism, but it's usually not like the liberal critique in an intellectual sense of fascism. It's more the way they behave is kind of a reflection of the cultural stagnation of liberalism. Or in other words, liberalism progresses to a point where it devolves into fascism, which is what we're seeing right now. That's the socialist critique against liberalism. However, unfortunately, it's too late. It already decayed into fascism. That already happened, you know? Like, those were salient critiques, like 8 years ago, when Hillary, or not 8, sorry, 9 now, when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. But now that Trump's won a second time, it seems like we're not in the critique liberals for falling to fascism bit. We're more in the like, well, holy shit, we're in the fascism bit. Does that make sense? But socialists can only take power during the crisis of capitalism. No. I disagree with that. I think that the socialist critique is at its best, or potentially at its best, before the crisis, because the crisis is when liberals have an easier excuse to defer to liberalism, because Hillary Clinton, as bad as she is, would have been so much better than Trump. It really depends on what priorities the liberals have. If you've been successful in radicalizing liberals, you can get them to understand the broader game, why liberalism decayed into fascism. But if you're talking to like lumpenproles, right? If you're talking to the average American will be like, what, you want to do like communism because Trump won? Wouldn't it have just been better if Kamala Harris won? And then you're like, no, Kamala Harris lost because liberalism's incapable of meaningfully addressing the problems within itself. That's why it decayed into fascism. And they would be like, wait, I don't get it. So the reason Kamala Harris lost to Trump is because Kamala Harris was a liberal? Are you saying she should have been a fascist? And you're like, no, she should have been leftist. And then they're like, but leftists are less popular than Kamala Harris. And you're like, yes, because the prevailing, the dominant liberal social ideological superstructure dispositioned people against that without individual socialist leaning policies poll very well, but there's a greater economic incentive for people to push the voters towards either liberals or fascists because they want to preserve the pre-existing modalities of capitalism. And then they're like, can you please get off my lawn? You're scaring my children when you scream at me like that. It's a difficult dynamic. So what you're saying is American liberals are failing to meet the ideals of liberalism? Well, all liberals will eventually fail to meet the ideas of liberalism, because part of being a liberal is being a capitalist, unfortunately. And capitalism, you know, places disproportionate power in the hands of a smaller class of people who have different interests to the majority class, and that smaller class of people will use their enormously disproportionate power to influence societies in ways that benefit them, and that ends up counteracting the socially liberal, because social liberalism is good, right? Like, I like things like progressivism. That's a socially liberal, right? Like, that's, you know, but it's fallen apart, and we know why. This is what we've seen over the past 10 or so years has been the clearest cut, like, affirmation of Marxist material or historical materialism, right? It's the clearest thing in the world, dude. In terms of like why people act the way they do and what happened, we have a society where there are problems economically in terms of wealth being extracted from the majority of the population into the wealthy. It causes inequality, it causes resentment, it causes discontent, and then you have things like Fox News and conservative talk radio convincing half the population that the reason they're experiencing all these deleterious social effects and economic effects is because of immigrants and black people and racism against white people and anti-Christian bias and blah blah blah. And then, like, it's all from the top down. It's all money flowing downwards to convince hundreds of millions of people that their lives are being made worse due to shit that's not affecting them at all, like fucking trans people in bathrooms. You've got 100 million Americans who genuinely think that something like that what's wrong with this country is like pronouns or something. What the fuck? That doesn't come from nowhere. When you talk about like the disposition of the average Democrat will say stuff like, I want better education, you know, I want better social security, I want better systems. All of these are valid points. And then you go to the average conservative and they're on the fucking moon. They're insane. Why? Because they were bought. Their minds were bought. Their minds were for sale and they were purchased. And all of this is because the wealthy want to displace the antipathy of the conservatives onto something other than their own acquisition of wealth, right? Oh, it's not the 1% stealing money or whatever. It's not the excess or surplus labor of the country being siphoned off and placed in offshore accounts and tax havens. It's immigrants, it's trans people, whatever else, right? So unfortunately, the dynamic does narrow to liberal versus conservative, but in reality, it's the cycle of liberalism that put us in this dynamic to begin with. Modern day conservatism could never have even existed in an environment where wealthy people did not have the ability to buy votes. It's just important to understand that the median Democrat in America today could have existed in almost any political environment because a lot of their concerns are driven by a rational understanding of the way the world works. I'm not saying they're very politically educated. I'm saying that it makes sense to live in this world and say stuff like, I think that we should have better education. I want people to be happy. I want good healthcare. These are rational. It indicates you look at the world, you see what's happening in the world, you learn from it, and then you have preferences and beliefs that stem from it, right? Like that's a rational relationship with the world. The shit the right wing cares about is entirely artificial and could not have existed without these exigent class-based pressures placed on them. It's always been like that, too. The anti-immigrant sentiment back in the 1800s, the idea that Chinese people were stealing work because they were coming to work in the railroads over in the West Coast, like all of these, it is over and over and over and over again. It's the same goddamn thing. It's wealthy people displacing anti-wealthy sort of antagonism onto other groups of people. I mean, it goes back before capitalism, right? In the Holy Roman Empire, you have like 500 little lords and fiefdoms and so on, but the peasants of one little group and the peasants of another little group are basically the exact same people, right? The peasants, during the 100-Year War, the peasants in France and the peasants in England are basically the same people. They live the same lives. They're concerned about the same things. They're both being oppressed by their monarchies. They have the same enemy. But they fight against each other because nationalism makes it easy to displace people's antipathy towards others. Oh, the reason your life is shit and you have 18 children and 13 of them die by the time they're 5 is because of, like, I don't know, the French or something. It's because of the goddamn papal, Norman armies from the South or whatever. Oh, yeah, the reason your life fucking sucks? Yeah, it's because of the goddamn Anglos up on the island or whatever. Right? You get me. Sorry, why did I get in this rant? I don't know. Type shit. Yeah, the point that I was trying to make was that you should be happy when liberals win against fascists because liberals are the people that we should be focused on critiquing. Socialism gets blurred in the background in a haze of anti-fascist arguments when the fascists are the ones in power. Also, the fascists tend to kill us first, which is bad for our health. When liberals are in power, we have the opportunity to deliver more incisive critiques. I think it's very meaningful that Bernie Sanders got closest to the presidency after 8 years of Obama, not after 4 years of Trump. I've been making that argument for a long time, and I still believe it. They don't listen to us. They'd rather die than listen to us. If by they you mean liberal politicians, then yeah, sure, they don't really listen to us. But it's not about liberal politicians. It's about the broader population. Again, keep in mind, like, I know a lot of you are 5 years old or whatever, but like before Bernie Sanders, leftism in America basically did not exist. There was like a small group of hardcore fucking like communist book group types who would get together and like, talk about how Marx was right all along. But the idea of like a broader populist leftist movement, Bernie Sanders basically kickstarted that. The fact that he was able to do this in spite of the obvious antipathy and opposition from the Democratic mainstream is an indication that it is in fact possible to shift massive portions of the population with the right rhetoric, with the right soapbox, with the right opportunity. And he did. So even if the Democratic politicians don't listen, it's not really about, like convincing them, I guess, or they can be pushed leftward to an extent. Bernie Sanders did shift the Overton window left within the Democratic primaries in 2016, 2020. Every other candidate wanted to sound like him because they saw how popular he was. But no, that is the environment where we are most effective. Now, in this environment, in this political environment, we have a unique dynamic here because our liberals, the Democratic Party, is uniquely bad. Most liberal parties in most of the world are not this bad. The Democrats aren't just liberals. They're not even just neoliberals. They are uniquely dickless neoliberals. Like they are astonishingly ineffective at doing what they do. So the circumstances are a bit different here. The dynamic is a little bit different in the sense that we might be able to push and be the louder voice just because the liberals are that bad at being a voice at all. Maybe that's to our benefit. Maybe it's not. I don't really know, man. History's complicated. But generally speaking, I guess I'll put it this way, okay? The French anti-Nazi resistance during World War II was composed of both leftists and liberals, but from a historical lens, we view them the same. Why? Because anti-fascism was the overriding characteristic, you know? I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. It's good to form a united front. But tell me, after Vichy France was defeated, did they become socialist or liberal? Exactly.